Alright, if you know me, you know I don't like to waste too much time on intros. So let me get right into it. I'm going to talk about 16 teams from North America and 16 from Europe. Today's video will be on NA, with EU being featured next week. Here's a list of all teams in this video, as well as the timestamps of their portion, so you can skip to the teams that you're actually interested in. The teams are ordered according to my own arbitrary and inconsequential power rankings. I'm going to talk about an aspect of them that I find interesting, and for some of them, I'll analyze a highlight that goes into further detail about that aspect. And is that everything? Alright, let's go. After they let go of the old Peeps roster before RLCS X, PK have had some pretty rough outings with their new roster. They finished in 14th place in RLCS X, which I'm sure fell far below their expectations. They made a roster change before winter, picking up Sosa to replace Kinsey, and saw some slight improvement in that split. But things completely fell apart in the spring, where they finished 18th and didn't even qualify for the last regional of the year. Even with the poor finish to the season, I still think that Sosa was a great addition to the team, and I think that he has enough talent to be the star player that this team needs him to be. He finished just outside of the top 10 in goals and saves, holding down the fort for PK on both sides of the field. Bringing in Alpha Cap should help shore up their defense in the midfield, and ensure that they don't need to withstand so much offensive pressure from their opponents. If they're able to shore up the midfield defense, and Rodoko is able to take on more responsibility on offense after ZPS's departure, then I think that they'll have a pretty good chance of returning to the solid form that they showed at certain times last season. For every other team that I'll list in these videos, I'll only include 3 players. But KCP is a special case, because according to information dropped on the ASAP Weekly podcast, link in the description, they will be running a legitimate 4-team roster with Wondermike, Mektos, Freshness, and Kronovi. This is something I'm very excited to see, because I'm surprised more teams haven't at least experimented with it in the past. Having 4 players under contract, all being treated equally on the team, creates healthy competition by having players compete against each other for the chance to make the starting roster, which is something you see all over the place in sports like basketball or football. But it does so without players dealing with the added stress of potentially losing their spot on the team, since they all have the security of their contract. And a 4-man roster gives more flexibility to make adjustments for different opponents, or even in the series between games if needed. The main question that comes to my mind is whether or not the team will be able to mesh together with 4 players all rotating in, because building team chemistry is hard enough with 3 players, and adding another won't make that any easier. But if KCP are able to figure out a system that works for the team as a whole, then I expect them to catch a lot of teams by surprise. The main thing I'm curious to see now is how the team dynamic switches now that they've brought in Wondermike to team with Mektos and Freshness, replacing Lineblaze, who remains with the Ghost organization. Lineblaze is more of a defensive player who looks to start counterattacks for his team, while Wondermike is more known for his mechanical plays on offense, looking to break the defense open through the air. I'm interested in seeing how Mektos and Freshness adapt to these differing playstyles, and how Kronovi will fit into the equation. If you watched my breakout players video, then you know how I feel about LJ. But if you didn't, then all you need to know is that this guy is really, really good. I'm still surprised that no other orgs picked him up during the offseason, but him staying put is a huge boost for this team. LJ is nearly unstoppable with the ball in his possession, being able to beat defenders on the ground and in the air. And he steadily improved throughout RLCS X, and by the end of the season, he was one of the region's best scorers and playmakers, constantly putting his teammates Krasix and Toasty in positions to succeed on offense. And LJ's improvement translated to team improvement, as the team had their best performance in the last tournament of the season, making it to top 4 in Spring Regional 3, taking NRG to Game 7 in those semifinals. But even with their peak performance at the end, this team has always been plagued by inconsistency, because the event before their top 4 finish, they failed to qualify for. And in the offseason, they've mixed good results, like their top 2 finish at IWO qualifiers, with not so good results, like missing the top 8 of Dazzerin's Wave Dash tournament, despite being one of the 8 teams with a direct invite. I don't think that this team will have any problem staying in the top 16 in the region, and they'll qualify for most, if not all of the events. But without that consistency, it's hard to place them any higher. But if this team finds its form again, then they're definitely one to watch out for. Last season, Alpine, now known as Torrent, played a heavy counterattacking style that saw the team score most of their goals in transition, and Percy was the primary conduit for this playstyle, as he led the team in both goals and saves, serving as the primary offensive finisher, as well as the safety valve when things didn't go well. But with Percy going to XSet and Kinsey coming in to replace him, it'll be interesting to see how Torrent adjusts. In the Gamers Without Borders tournament this offseason, the team saw Kinsey take over Percy's spot as the primary goal scorer, while doing so in a fashion that was much more aggressively positioned than Percy. And this aggressiveness helped them have much longer sustained offensive pushes than they'd have last season. But with that being said, it's hard to argue against Percy being the team's best player last season, and it's hard to imagine the team improving after losing their best player. So I'm predicting a small step back from their 8th place performance last season. But on the bright side, their esports decal is one of my favorite in the shop. I mean, come on, look at this thing. How can you not love it? Last season got off to a slow start for V1, or as I like to call them, the Ghost of Cloud9. When they brought in AXB to fill Squishy's spot, they had a pretty rough outing in the fall split, only making it to the top 16 once out of 3 events. So they dropped AXB and went looking for a replacement. which led to this interesting report from the Shift Twitter page. Since they ultimately picked up Calm, it's hard to dispute the validity of this report. And that being the case, this points to a pretty clear strategy that V1 had for their roster move. Find a player with a ton of mechanical ability to team up with Gimmick and Torment, and figure out the rest from there. And to be fair, it worked out pretty decently, as they made the top 8 in 3 different events following the roster change. Their playstyle was defined by equal contributions on offense, with all 3 players being separated by only 0.07 goals per game, with Gimmick and Torment both averaging 0.6. And as you'd expect, Gimmick and Calm were generally positioned very aggressively, with Torment playing farther back in the third man role. With version 1 not playing in any of the off-season tournaments, there's not much reason to suggest that they'll rise or fall in the standings. And that being the case, I think they'll finish around the same area that they did last season, where they finished 10th, and potentially falling a bit as they could end up behind some teams with more positive projections, like XSet or True Neutral. I like the Soniqs this year, and I think that they're primed to have a pretty good season. T. Carell has finally broken free of the T. Carell cycle and established a consistent presence during RLCS X, first standing in for XSet during the fall split, and then joining the Sonics shortly thereafter in the winter split. He showed great mechanics with his ground and air dribbles to take the ball out of defense from a third man position, and I think that it was a great choice for the Sonics to try to build around him after Shock and Rodiz left for Ghost. But that choice looked even better when they brought in Andy and ZPS to round out the team. Andy was the offensive leader for the Loco/CLT roster, leading the team in goals and assists. With Andy on the front lines of offense and T. Carell being the patient third man, that's already a great start to a team. But in this roster's debut performance in the WePlay Invitational, ZPS was actually the star of the show with his great passing ability, as he finished first in the tournament in assists per game, while serving as a consistent scorer as well. If ZPS is able to play at this high of a level during the season, then I think that the Sonics will do very well for themselves, being at the top of the next tier of teams looking to break into contention for a world spot. In all honesty, I'm not expecting too much to change for this roster as far as playstyle is concerned compared to last season, because Shock and Rodiz are going from one defensive player to another, as they have basically swapped out T. Carell for Line Blaze. And while T. Carell often goes for slower plays when taking the ball out of defense, whereas Line Blaze leans more towards pushing the pace on counterattacks, I don't think that small difference will affect Shock and Rodiz too much, and I think that Line Blaze will slot into the team dynamic comfortably. But one question that I had when looking at this roster was how well are they going to be able to get the ball to each other on offense, and whether or not one player would stand out as the primary passer. Because when looking at their stats, Shock and Line Blaze averaged 0.5 assists per game, which wasn't too bad at all, sitting around the middle of the pack in their region. And Rodiz averaged 0.36 assists, which was actually kind of bad, being bottom 5 in the region. Since they didn't play in any broadcasted tournaments in the offseason together, I decided to look through ballchasing.com to see if I could find any replays of scrims to try to answer this question. And sure enough, I found one replay that they had against a lower tier team. They won this game 3-0, and out of their 3 goals, none of them were assisted. And I know that one scrim isn't the end-all be-all for a team's playstyle, especially when the matchup is this lopsided, but this game still had some trends that point to potential areas of improvement for Ghost. On top of not recording any assists, there were a few opportunities for infield passes that they didn't take advantage of. Many times if they did try to pass, it would be off the back wall, or they would just take a straight line to goal with the defense parked in the net, going back and forth with them. It worked out in this game because Ghost was just way better, and they managed to pull off some good solo plays, but against better teams, they'll probably have to take advantage of these opportunities to reach their full potential. But with that being said, the pieces are there for Ghost to be a really good team, and I'm looking forward to see how they put them together. After First Killer left Rogue to join FaZe Clan, they were left with the impossible task of trying to replace him. There's no easy solution for replacing a player as good as him, but Rogue did pretty good for themselves when they picked up Gyro, a player who has consistently been around the top level of RLCS ever since his breakout performance with the Peeps, with Mist and Riddles at DreamHack. Gyro has always shown very solid playmaking ability with the ball, but with AJ being on his team, he hasn't been able to show it off as much as he potentially could have. But now that he's joining Rogue, with 2 teammates who aren't nearly as ball dominant, especially so in Siroko's case, Gyro is once again in a position where he can serve as the primary ball handler for his team to help carry the offensive burden for Rogue. If there's one thing that Gyro has to fix though, it would have to be the mental mistakes, and these will become especially prevalent in bigger moments. When things weren't going well for FaZe, you could see how stressed Gyro would become in the face cams whenever they were shown, and this would affect his gameplay, with poor decision making and double commits. And you'd have to imagine that this was a big reason that FaZe chose to let him go. But if he's able to fix these issues and remain more calm under pressure, then I think that Rogue will be able to have a solid season despite losing first, but just how solid it will be remains to be seen. Percy joining XSet could very well have been the best case scenario for both parties, and I'm very excited for the outlook of this team heading into the new season. I talked about this team in my previous video discussing breakout players for next season, where I featured Percy. But to summarize my thoughts on this team, J-Pow and Hoxer are both great playmakers of the ball, and they show their playmaking in different ways, with J-Pow preferring to slow the play down, and Hoxer liking to pick up the pace. And while these two have the ball in offense, Percy will be hanging back in the third man position, ready to take a shot off the opportunities that they create. Or if things don't go well and they lose possession, He won't need to go very far to get back to goal and play his great goal line defense. This style has already worked out for them during Dazzler's Wave Dash tournament, where XSet finished third behind Team Envy and Spacestation, and Percy was in the top 10 in the event in both goals and saves. I have high hopes for XSet, and I think that they'll be a legitimate contender for spots at the Split Majors, and definitely for a spot at the World Championship. And I have especially high hopes for Percy, as I think that this season he will cement his place as one of the best players in the region. True Neutral is the ultimate wildcard coming into this season. We haven't had cross-regional play since Season 8 LAN at the end of 2019, so it's honestly anybody's guess for how those matchups will play out. But with the team playing in multiple off-season tournaments, we've seen a sneak peek at how the South American champions will fare in their first season in North America. And so far, they have looked really good, especially in Dazzler's Wave Dash tournament, where they picked up some great wins against teams like Soniqs, Oxygen, and even NRG, where they took the third most shots in the tournament, but also allowed the fifth most while having the most saves. So if you don't get anything else out of watching them, you're going to get some intense moments. Their ability to take so many shots and sustain a lot of offensive pressure is what helped them get their win against NRG, where they outshot them in the series, averaging 13 shots per game to NRG's 10, including outshooting them 12-2 in the decisive Game 5. If they are able to maintain offensive pressure like this against NRG of all teams, then that's a really good sign, regardless of how big or small the tournament is. I'm looking forward to True Neutral gaining more experience against top-level NA teams and building off their past success to have a good season, being a strong contender for a World Championship spot. The story of the Shopify Rebellion last season was one that was both encouraging and frustrating all at the same time. When the season started, they brought in a fresh rookie in Beast Mode, who had just turned 15 and had no RLCS experience, so it was anybody's guess as to how they would perform, but they did pretty well. But their season was frustrating because they were on the edge of greatness multiple times, but could never quite take the next step and get something to show for their efforts. They made it to the grand finals of regionals twice, but they weren't able to pull out wins in either series, and they were literally one game away from making it top 6 and qualifying for the championships, and they ended up losing to FaZe Clan in that decisive Game 7. And even in the WePlay Invitational this offseason, they ran through the upper bracket, beating Spacestation, FaZe, and NRG, only to lose to Team Envy in the tight grand final. I can't imagine how frustrating it must be for these players to come so close to these tournament wins and keep coming short. But despite that, this team proved that they're a legitimate threat for top 5 contention, and that they're capable of beating anybody on the right day. Every player on this team is threatening in their own unique ways. Rapid with his mechanical flair and unpredictability on offense, which helped him lead the team in assists, in addition to being set up very aggressively whenever his team has the ball. And Memory with his great offensive positioning, allowing him to receive passes from Beast Mode and Rapid, and his great shot accuracy, both of which helped him lead the team in goals. But the true star of the show in my opinion was Beast Mode, who was incredibly quick and confident with the ball, looking like a seasoned veteran in only his first season. I think that this squad is definitely going to make it to the World Championship, and I'd be shocked if they didn't make it to at least one of the split majors. G2 have been one of the best offensive teams in the world for a while now, and that continued in RLCS X, where they had the most goals per game in the region at 2.26, and they've used a more aggressive offensive style ever since they brought in Chicago at the beginning of RLCS Season 7, which was almost 3 years ago. Chicago has been with G2 for 3 years? Wow. But between Chicago's aggressiveness on and off the ball, JNAP's ability to take advantage of the space that opens up because of that aggressiveness, and the great team cohesion between all three players in offense, G2 have become the pinnacle of offensive success in Rocket League. While Chicago and JNAPs were the known commodities for G2 last season, things changed pretty quickly when Rizzo announced his retirement and the team brought in Dries as a replacement. Rizzo did most of his damage on offense when he was off the ball, proven by his being third in the region in demos per game, while also being first in time spent as the player farthest from the ball. He would look to disrupt the defense and look to create more space for Chicago and JNAPs to work with on the ball, and he would almost always defer possession to these two if it was an option. The main question when Rizzo left was how would Dries fit into G2's playstyle, and what changes would JNAPs and Chicago need to make in order to fit him in. Well, the answer to that was that he would fit in very, very well, but he didn't do it by mimicking Rizzo's off-ball disruption. In fact, he basically did the complete opposite. Here are the standings for the most assists per game in RLCSX, and as you see, JNAPs and Chicago were second and fourth respectively. And can you guess who third is? Well, given the segue, I'm sure you can figure it out. It was Dries. But by bringing him in, G2 switched out their off-ball disruptor for another on-ball threat. And the main way that Dries created scoring opportunities was with his speed. He wouldn't always pull out flashy passes like JNAPs or Chicago, but when he would get the ball in the midfield, he'd take it and go as quickly as possible to the other side of the field. And if you do that right, that plan can be just as effective as any other. He put his speed to good use in back-to-back plays against NRG in the championships. Here he gets the ball in the midfield with a bit of space, and Garrett waiting nearby. Usually Garrett looks to challenge aggressively in the midfield, but with Dries being so much closer to the ball than him, he'd be easily beat if he tried to dive in. So instead of challenging early, he turns to Shadow instead. Dries takes the ball up to the sky and immediately follows after it. He's boosting towards the ball for a second hit, but he actually stops for a split second while he's in the air when he's confident that he has the next touch lined up. This allows him to save a little bit of boost while staying in complete control of the ball. Once Garrett gets close enough to contest the play, Dries starts boosting again to ensure that he beats Garrett to the ball, and he arrows through the hit to send it to the backboard even faster. He looks for the double tap, but goes a bit too high, but in this case, that works out just fine. The threat of the shot has forced Justin to jump in net to attempt to save it, and the bounce off the backboard serves as a perfect pass to JNaps, who slots in the shot for the goal. The next goal in the game starts with Chicago clearing the ball down the field, where Dries is waiting to receive it and Squishy is lurking in the area. They jump at nearly the same time for the ball, but since Dries is facing towards the ball and Squishy is directly underneath it, Dries has a better angle of approach and manages to beat Squishy to the touch, turning off ball cam and sending it towards the wide open NRG backboard. Chicago is there for the follow-up touch and hits it off the post, something that we can all relate to, but the bounce goes right to Dries, who gets the easy tap-in goal. I'm pretty sure that I'm a lot higher on FaZe Clan than most other people, because I could easily see them being a top 3 team in the region by the time the season's over. A big reason for that relates to this tweet from ex-RLCS pro Joro, who actually used to be one of my favorite players before he retired. Now I agree with this tweet to a certain extent, because ultimately at the top level, chemistry is going to play a part in the team's success. Everybody has tendencies and preferred playstyles, and if you're able to find players whose playstyles complement each other well, it's going to be easier for them to succeed. But at the same time, if a team has multiple great players, then I believe that the individual strength of the players alone will be enough to win a lot of games, given that the talent that you're working with is good enough. Of course, a talented team with chemistry will be better than a talented team without it, but having that talent gives you a great foundation from which a great team can be formed, and FaZe Clan without a doubt has that great foundation. They finished 6th in the standings last season, and now they've taken Gyro, a really good player in his own right, and replaced him with First Killer, who is still my pick for the best player in the world, and a lot of people are still predicting them to finish around 6th, but I personally don't see that happening. One big question mark that I've been seeing around this team is in regards to boost, and whether or not there will be enough of it to go around for these 2 boost heavy players, which is a false narrative and probably won't be an issue. While First Killer led the region in boost collected and was 2nd in boost used last season, AJ was 50th in boost used and 55th in boost collected. Torrent was way ahead of that last season, being 17th in boost used, and they didn't seem to have too many issues with boost starving each other, although Toroko being dead last in boost used probably helped them out a bit as well. But on top of being 1st in boost used, First Killer also led the region in boost stolen by a big margin. So if he's boost starving anybody, it's not his teammates, but his opponents, which is never a bad thing. So while I think that the talent of First Killer and AJ is enough to win a lot of games, I also think that their playstyles complement each other pretty well, which will help them form chemistry and perform even better as the season goes on. First Killer is an absolute menace with the ball, where he pushes the pace and immediately disrupts the defense once he loses it, proven by his being 1st in boost stolen and demolitions. And AJ loves to air dribble when he has the ball, using his great aerial mechanics to score goals or create scoring chances for others, which works well with First Killer disrupting the backline, making it even harder to stop these aerial plays. But he is also more than capable of pushing the pace right along with First Killer, as we've already seen in the WePlay tournament. The play actually starts with a double commit on the save, and First Killer hitting both the ball and AJ off to the right. But after this bump, AJ lands in a perfect position for the follow-up hit, and bounces it off the wall to keep it away from Atomic. This bounce goes straight to First Killer, who jumps up and bounces it off his wheels to drop it right back down to AJ, and beats Turbo in the process. AJ throws it off the wall again, this time landing there himself to get outside of the ball and open up options for either an infield pass or a shot. But Atomic has run back into the play and hits the ball to his back corner to dispossess AJ. But unluckily for Atomic, First Killer had just taken their boost, so he's already in that back corner. So Atomic's hit passes it straight to First Killer, who directs it infield off the back wall, keeping it away from Mist, who's waiting on the near post. And with no envy players in a good position to defend the shot, AJ gets a simple tap in for the goal. This play was chaotic, but it shows AJ's and First Killer's ability to improvise in awkward situations and work together to push the ball downfield quickly. Oh yeah, and Illusion's pretty good too. The last time I talked about Spacestation, I called them the San Antonio Spurs of Rocket League because of their great ability to use each other on offense with efficient passes and the fact that they don't just have one primary offensive playmaker, but all 3 players contribute equally on offense. This is shown in the stat lines because the gap between them in goals per game is only 0.16 and the gap in assists is 0.11, and these gaps are among the smallest in the region between teammates. Spacestation had a great beginning and end to last season, winning the Fall Major and coming in 2nd to NRG in the North American Championship. But for a while during the season, they were falling short of their lofty expectations. This was shown in their winter split results, where they didn't win any events and even failed to make a top 8 for one of them. This slump was probably because of... Actually, I'll let Riddles explain.
Not to blame it all on this, but we've kind of been testing out playstyles for Worlds. We're trying to see what works. Obviously, our slow play, solo play method and fall split it doesn't work anymore. Everyone adapted to it. The one we've been working with for grid and this regional, I think, is probably gonna be where we ended off for the season. It's been working really well. It's pretty easy to keep like consistent pressure.
So they went away from the slow solo playstyle that worked so well for him in the fall, but he never really specified what the adaptation was. So I looked into it a bit more myself. Their playstyle of using each other on offense and passing more often was the adaptation and the reason why they were able to do so well towards the end of the season. And I didn't realize how big of a shift it was until I went back and looked at some of their plays from the fall split. Back then, when someone was taking the ball from offense to defense, the people off ball on the offensive side of the field, most of the time being Reddles, would often sit on the far side of the field waiting for the ball to bounce their way after a potential 50. And if he wasn't doing that, then he was probably looking for a bump to clear the way for his teammates. In this playstyle, the player with the ball would often take a straight line to goal in order to put pressure on the defense, and then rely on his teammates to follow up on the play, in hopes of catching the defense out of position while they're still recovering from the first shot. And while they would sometimes try to go for passes, they wouldn't work very often, usually because they were so far apart that the defense could easily creep into the passing lanes and intercept it whenever they tried. Both goals in this game illustrate this playstyle, as they are both scored off of solo plays. But later in the season, when a teammate is on the ball, instead of moving into positions that are more reactive and they wait to see what happens, the off-ball teammates move into positions where they're more proactive in the play and they serve as an option for the pass, keeping themselves directly involved in the play and giving the player on the ball another option. You see this playstyle reach its peak form in the best passing play of the season during Spring Regional 2 against NRG. After the defense gets a touch on the ball, it goes out to Spacestation, and the difference in this playstyle is already clear. Earlier in the season, Rebels would have probably tried to rotate out of the offensive corner at this point, to either rotate around the player of the ball to get in a more supportive position, or to turn infield and bump the goalie. But this time, he slows down as he's driving down the wall to stay in the play and open up the passing option for Spacestation, who drops the ball down to him, and then he gives it to Arsenal, who gives it back to Spacestation. The shooting opportunity is already opened up at this point, with Justin caught in goal, and Sip in prime shooting position, but the pass is just slightly behind him, and he has to slow down to properly receive it. So instead of trying to force out a shot anyways, he uses this angle to throw another pass out to Reddles in the middle of the field. Reddles has started to drive out of the play at this point, but with Spacestation calling out the pass, he turns around and gives one last pass to Arsenal, who's able to slot it perfectly in the bottom right corner. Their move away from focusing on solo plays and looking to each other more on offense enabled a play like this to happen and help them regain their form towards the end of the season. Envy was one of the most consistent teams during RLCS, making the top 8 of every single regional and major, joining NRG as the only 2 teams to do so in North America. In this circuit-based format where every tournament matters, the ones who can keep that consistency remain at the top. And that's exactly why Envy are poised to contend for the title again this year. They all contribute equally on offense, but they all contribute in slightly different ways. You have my personal favorite out of the bunch, Atomic, who is insanely creative with the ball in his possession, and in my opinion is the best passer in his region. Then you have Mist, who is excellent in every part of the field, but on offense he is also an excellent passer in his own right, while being notorious for his great shooting, consistently hitting the ball with power and accuracy, often as a result from passes from Atomic. And finally you have Turbo, the 4-time world champion and many people's choice as the greatest player of all time. For just about every team that he's been on during his career, he's been the glue guy for the team, keeping everything together with his great positioning and decision making, always doing what's needed to give his teammates the best chance at success. But the most amazing part of Turbo's game is how he's been able to have all this success while showing almost no mechanical flair. For example, here's one of his most famous shots that became known as the Turbo Flick.
The attack for Spacestation.
Oh,
here's Turbo. I don't know what that was, but it works for Turbo.
You'll love to see it when a play like this unfolds because he didn't get the flick. It didn't look pretty, but instead he just tumbles in.
This isn't to say that Turbo has no mechanics at all. He has the fundamentals down perfectly, meaning that he's able to hit the ball exactly where he wants it to go every time he takes a touch. But this is something that pretty much everyone else has, especially at the pro level, so it really isn't that special. But when it comes to flashy mechanics, like air dribbles, flip resets, or anything with that level of flair, we hardly ever see Turbo hit these. And in fact, we hardly ever see him try. So he's established his position as one of the best ever by only using his mastery of fundamentals and positioning. This seems like something that should be easily replicated by other players, and yet Turbo's the only one who's able to impact the game so well with his bare bones playstyle. So what exactly is he doing that sets him apart from everyone else? Honestly, there are a lot of things, but one thing is that he's very patient, and you hardly ever see him overcommit for a play. He goes where he thinks the ball's going to end up ahead of time, and then waits there to see how the play will unfold. But another thing that he does very often is occupy the middle of the field. This area is extremely crucial for both offense and defense. It provides the best shooting angles, more room to work with if you have the ball, and obviously is the best place to defend shots. Controlling this part of the field is crucial, and Turbo does that consistently. The final goal of this match from the WePlay tournament shows exactly how that pays off. For about the last 20 seconds of this match, Turbo doesn't leave the middle of the field. He collects boost pads to get from 40 to 100 boosts in only a couple of seconds, and then moves up with his team's offensive push. He's in position for a potential pass from Atomic, but when Beast Mode takes it away, he stays put. Beast Mode directs the ball to the middle of the field, where Rapid is waiting to go for a clear. With Turbo there to threaten a challenge, Rapid doesn't get a very powerful clear, and the ball rolls straight out to Mist. Turbo doesn't even jump for a 50 or anything, he just waits. Mist throws the ball upfield to Atomic, who again has Turbo open for a potential passing option, still waiting in the middle of the field. Unfortunately, the ball is just out of his reach, and he isn't able to connect with it cleanly. Beast Mode tries to clear the ball across the field, but Turbo is sitting right in its path and pops the ball up to keep the play alive. While Mist fouls the touch, Turbo slowly works his way back to the middle of the field while staying close enough to the right side to reach the ball should it bounce over there. Mist's shot is saved by Beast Mode, and Atomic beats Memory on the follow-up to take another shot, which is saved by Rapid, but there's one more person waiting in the middle of the field to take the final shot, and no Rebellion defenders are in a good position to stop it. So Turbo knocks in the goal and gives Envy the win. And in case you were curious, here's Turbo's heat map for that entire game. This strip down the middle of the field shows the key part of why Turbo is so effective, occupying this space as often as you can. And honestly, this could probably help you be more effective in your games too. Everybody knows about NRG's offense, because when you have players like Garrett, Justin, and Squishy, you're going to score a lot of goals. And they did, finishing second in goals per game as a team in the region, behind only the offensive powerhouse of G2. But one thing that doesn't get talked about nearly enough is their phenomenal team defense. They allow the fewest goals per game, the second fewest shots per game, and the lowest shooting percentage for their opponents during RLCS. There are more stats that illustrate just how dominant this team was, but they all paint the same picture. NRG plays defense to near perfection in every part of the field, from their own offensive half all the way to their own goal line. And to be honest, they do so in a style that's very similar to BDS, who have the best defense in Europe. All three players on both teams have their preferred defensive roles. Garrett G plays the Mark by 8 role by aggressively challenging the ball in the midfield and looking to shut down the opponent's possession before it gets going. And Justin plays the Monkey Moon role of rotating back around the play to the back post to set up in net as the goal line defender after their own offensive possession. And then you have the two middlemen, Extra and Squishy, the role with the most flexibility in decision making, and in my opinion, the most important role for both teams in sustaining their elite defense. The main difference between these teams though is that NRG are far more likely to break this mold if they feel that someone has a better challenge. Even if Garrett is able to immediately challenge, sometimes he'll let Squishy go for it if they feel like he's in a better position for it. And the same with Justin. Squishy will often fake challenge and shadow to buy time for Justin to get back to goal, but when Justin arrives, he may just go for the challenge himself if the opportunity is there. NRG adapts their defensive decision making more often than BDS does, who like to maintain their structure as often as possible. And it's impossible to say right now which works better because they both work really well. But I think that Squishy's awareness is a huge reason for why these adaptations work so well in defense. Squishy is honestly one of the smartest players that we have in Rocket League, and since he has been known for his great mechanics for most of his career, I think that people don't appreciate how smart of a player he's become in his time as a professional, and it's his intelligence that elevates NRG's defense to the next level. In this play, after Garrett hits the ball away from Reddles, Squishy is the last man back on defense, with Reddles chasing him down and Typical moving the ball towards NRG's defensive corner. He's the only man in position to stop the offensive push, so he can't afford to get taken out. He drives up the back wall to avoid getting hit by Reddles, and when he gets to the top of the goal, he hits the bricks, allowing him to stay in net in a solid defensive position, while Reddles drives out. Then he jumps down to get to the ground faster, flips over, and wave dashes to regain some of the speed that he lost. He's now able to clear the ball upfield where Garrett is waiting, and Garrett gets a 50 that sends the ball up into the air. Squishy drives to the mid boost, and once he grabs it, he sees that no one else has gone for the ball yet, so he realizes that he can take it for himself. He has multiple options for this touch. He could take a direct shot on net, or even has enough boost to go for a double tap, but instead, he gets his wheels on it and drops it down into a tight window for a pass to Justin. His shot unfortunately goes high, but this play showed Squishy's ability to make smart plays on both offense and defense. And for what it's worth, he was able to get a goal later by coming up from being the last man back and catching SSG out of position. So at this point, you've been listening to me talk for about 28 minutes, and I don't have anything else to add. So I'm gonna end the video now. See you guys next week for Europe.